They say the body has limits, that pain, exhaustion, and fear are nature's way of keeping us alive. But in the shadows of Cold War intelligence, those words weren't warnings, they were challenges. The CIA didn't want stronger soldiers. They wanted soldiers who could operate after the human body had already quit. Not motivation, not discipline, reprogramming. The mission wasn't to build muscle, it was to erase weakness coded into the human mind. Inside isolated training compounds, recruits weren't trained. They were broken down. Sleep deprivation, ice baths, hours of silence and darkness. No clocks, no comfort. Every sensory anchor ripped away until time, hunger, and fear blurred into one long hallucination. And that's where the experiment began, to find what's left when every instinct to survive has already failed. Because what if survival isn't the end goal? What if the real power begins right after the body gives up? The CIA's psychologists had one obsession: the switch. That invisible moment when the brain stops saying no. They learned that when pain becomes meaningless, the body stops treating it as a signal and starts treating it as background noise. That's when something terrifying happens. The subject doesn't just ignore pain. They stop acknowledging it exists. Their heart rate slows, their breath steadies, and suddenly the body is running on something else. Not adrenaline, not energy, but pure mechanical will. The soldiers who reached that state called it the white room. No emotion, no panic, no thought. Just movement, controlled, efficient, detached. It wasn't strength, it was absence. And that's what made it powerful. These men could perform through injuries, endure temperatures that would shut down a normal body, and act without hesitation in situations that should trigger paralysis, because their brains no longer asked permission. But here's the part nobody talks about. When you train a body to obey commands after the mind collapses, you aren't creating a superhuman. You're deleting a human. That's the fine print. Every breakthrough came with a cost: loss of empathy, identity, and sometimes reality itself. The perfect soldier was not the strongest one, but the one who no longer recognized fear as a reason to stop. And in that dark equation, body minus humanity equals obedience, the agency found what it wanted: proof that the limits of the human body were never physical, they were psychological. And once the mind breaks, the body stops resisting. They called it controlled collapse, a beautiful phrase for something ugly. The idea was simple: destroy the structure of the self, sleep, identity, emotion, and watch what's left take over. In facilities buried under desert sand or deep forest canopies, recruits were stripped of every external measure of safety. No ranks, no clocks, no names, just bodies and commands. Scientists and field operatives stood behind one-way glass, observing how far a person could drift from sanity before instinct rewrote the code. It began with isolation, days in absolute darkness or blinding light. The air pumped cold, then hot, then cold again. The heartbeat of the building itself became the only rhythm to follow. They'd pipe in white noise until silence felt like violence. That's when the first crack appeared, the brain begging for meaning, any meaning. Once the mind starts reaching for order, it becomes programmable. Next came the stress drills, submersion in freezing water, forced marches without rest, breath held until the lungs screamed. Every reflex that shouted stop was met with one command: continue. Instructors whispered the same words again and again until they embedded like code. You are not tired. You are not cold. You do not feel. Over time, the body believed it, because the body listens to repetition more than reason. Then they layered in deception: fake rescues, fake failures, fake deaths. Soldiers would think the drill was over, only for the torment to restart. The purpose wasn't cruelty, it was conditioning, teaching the brain that relief is a trap, that comfort is an illusion. Once that lesson landed, the body stopped expecting mercy. That's when performance soared, endurance spiked, reflexes sharpened. Pain tolerance reached numbers doctors still refused to publish. But there was a catch. The longer they stayed in that state, the harder it became to return. Some emerged stronger. Others never really emerged at all. They spoke in monotone, slept with eyes open, couldn't distinguish training from reality. To the agency, That wasn't failure, it was data. Proof that identity itself could be dismantled and rebuilt for function. This was the science of breaking, not motivation, not resilience, pure behavioral engineering. The moment pain lost its authority, the body stopped asking for permission. The question wasn't how much a human could take, it was how much humanity had to die for the mission to live. Once the mind was stripped bare, no ego, no identity, no fear, the rebuilding began. But this wasn't recovery, it was reconstruction. Instructors called it Phase 2, but among the recruits, it had another name, the rewiring. After breaking the human operating system, they programmed a new one, faster, colder, cleaner. The goal wasn't to restore humanity, it was to replace it with precision. Recruits were taught to move, shoot, and react without conscious thought, reflex over reason. Their bodies became instruments responding to stimulus, not choice. Instructors would stage chaos, explosions, screaming, blinding lights, complete sensory overload. In that storm, a command whispered through an earpiece would trigger automatic motion, aim, move, eliminate, recover. No hesitation, no moral calculation. The body obeyed before the mind even processed what was happening. To civilians, it looked like discipline. To scientists, it was proof of concept, that the human body could be recoded like hardware. Every response built from repetition, every emotion suppressed until it no longer interfered. Pain tolerance wasn't trained, it was deleted. Fatigue wasn't conquered, it was ignored. Hunger, fear, compassion, all filed away under unnecessary data. What remained was pure functionality, a biological machine that could endure any condition, execute any order, survive any hell. They introduced the neutral zone, a mental state between alert and unconscious. Soldiers learned to slow their heart rate on command, to lower body temperature, to redirect pain through controlled breathing. Measured under medical instruments, their vitals didn't make sense. The body refused to follow normal biological laws. Some researchers claimed they were witnessing the next stage of human evolution. Others called it a psychological illusion. But the results were undeniable. Reaction times doubled, recovery times halved, fear response nearly erased. In debriefs, subjects described the experience like stepping outside their body, watching themselves act from a distance. Detached, efficient, unstoppable. It wasn't adrenaline, it was automation. They didn't feel proud, they didn't feel powerful, they didn't feel anything. And that was the point, because emotion, in the eyes of intelligence agencies, was inefficiency. Guilt wastes seconds, fear burns oxygen, doubt kills missions. So they erased them all, one by one, until only the mission remained. What they created wasn't a hero or a monster, it was the physical embodiment of obedience. And that's when they realized the horrifying truth. Once you rebuild a man without fear or feeling, he doesn't just follow orders, he becomes incapable of doing anything else. When the Cold War ended, the experiments didn't. They just changed names. The world no longer needed faceless soldiers hiding in the dark. It needed performance, endurance, focus, control. The same mental warfare that once belonged to black sites and classified facilities started leaking into gyms, corporate seminars, and elite performance coaching. The uniform changed, the language softened, but the ideology was the same. Break the limits, erase the weakness, control the self. Former operatives and trainers, men who had seen the inside of the machine, started selling fragments of what they'd learned. Stress inoculation, resilience conditioning, mind over body. Buzzwords that sounded motivational, but came from the same doctrine that built emotionless soldiers. Civilians began chasing that same white room state, total calm under pressure, complete detachment from discomfort, ice baths, sleep deprivation, silence retreats, endurance races designed to simulate military hell. They called it mental toughness. They had no idea what they were imitating, because what those programs never mentioned was the cost. The point of those original methods wasn't to make people stronger, it was to make them compliant. Every breath exercise, every forced exposure, every drill was designed to suppress emotion and overwrite instinct. The same techniques that made a man unstoppable in combat could also make him hollow in peace. And when ex-soldiers tried to live normal lives, they discovered the truth. You can't just turn obedience off. the switch doesn't flip back. Psychologists started noticing it. Athletes, CEOs, even influencers pushing themselves into total burnout while calling it discipline. The same detached focus that once served intelligence agencies was now being worshipped by civilians as self-improvement. Nobody realized they were reenacting a system built to erase humanity. The language of resilience became a religion, and every sermon ended the same way. Pain is weakness, fear is failure, feelings are flaws. But the irony? The human body doesn't need to be broken to evolve. It needs to be understood. The agency never cared about that part. They only wanted control. And control, once you taste it, spreads like a virus. You start mistaking numbness for power, silence for mastery, isolation for focus. So when you scroll through a feed and see a man sitting in freezing water talking about becoming unbreakable, understand this. That's not new wisdom. That's the ghost of a government experiment, repackaged, sanitized, and sold back to you as self-discipline. The war came home, and now we call it training. At first, it looked like evolution. Soldiers who didn't flinch, athletes who didn't quit, CEOs who slept 3 hours a night and bragged about it. But deep inside that silence, something started to rot. The body doesn't forget what the mind suppresses. It just stores it somewhere darker. The CIA's doctors began noticing the cracks, heart rates that stayed elevated for days, adrenal systems that refused to shut down, emotional detachment that bordered on psychopathy. The human machine was efficient, yes, but it was breaking in new, invisible ways. You can only delete emotion for so long before something inside demands payment. Nightmares, tremors, a constant sense that time itself is off balance. Operatives would return home and still live by mission protocols, counting steps, scanning exits, eating on timers. Their minds were conditioned for war, but the war never ended. The body had learned one rule: don't feel, and that's a command you can't unlearn easily. Some tried therapy, most refused. Because how do you heal from something that was never supposed to hurt? The program had taught them that empathy is a liability, rest is weakness, fear is a defect. But when you rip those parts out, you don't become free, you become lost. Pain, after all, isn't just a warning system. It's proof that you're alive. Without it, the world turns flat. Food has no taste. Music has no meaning. Victory has no joy. And that's when the real damage appeared. The same neurological rewiring that let a man ignore pain also numbed his sense of connection. Relationships fell apart. Families dissolved. Some vanished into isolation, addicted to that numb focus state they once called calm. Others kept chasing pain just to feel something. The agency called them burnouts. Civilians call them high performers. It's the same disease, born from the same lie, that you have to destroy yourself to become strong. They told soldiers to silence the voice of weakness, and society turned it into a mantra. But here's the paradox. That voice is human. It's the only thing that stops you from becoming a tool. The moment you mute it completely, you're no longer improving. You're erasing yourself. The body can survive without emotion. It can function, fight, perform. But it can't live. That was the truth, buried under all those classified reports. The human machine is capable of incredible endurance, but it was never built to operate without a soul. Every program has a breaking point, even the ones designed to break people. The CIA's scientists eventually hit theirs. It started when the data stopped making sense. Subjects were outperforming every physical benchmark, running on fractured bones, functioning with no sleep for 90 hours, showing no stress response under torture simulations. But something else was happening underneath: spontaneous blackouts, memory collapse, total emotional amnesia. The mind wasn't adapting anymore. It was disappearing. One report described it perfectly. Subject demonstrates exceptional resilience, but lacks recognizable identity, operates effectively, exhibits no personal motive. In other words, they'd built the perfect operative, and in doing so, erased the human being completely. That terrified even the men who designed it. Because if you can train someone to act without identity, what stops you from doing it again and again? Until obedience itself becomes the system. So they tried to pull the plug. Files were sealed, projects renamed, facilities abandoned. But the damage was already done. Hundreds of operatives had been processed through the early phases. You can't just shut down conditioning like that. It lingers in the body like radiation. Even decades later, veterans would describe the same symptoms: numbness, flashbacks, emotional flatlines, dissociation during high stress. They'd been rewired to survive anything, except peace. And the science didn't vanish either. The research on stress adaptation, pain modulation, and emotional suppression got quietly redistributed into behavioral optimization studies. Military, athletic, even corporate. New language, same skeleton. The men in suits who once built ghosts now called it enhanced human performance. They didn't stop experimenting. They just changed the mission statement. Inside, though, there was panic. One declassified memo warned, prolonged suppression of effective response may produce irreversible cognitive segmentation. Translation: when you erase emotions long enough, the brain splits. One part functions, one part fades. That line between human and machine blurs until there's no coming back. And that was the moment some insiders finally said it out loud. We created soldiers who can win every battle except the one inside their own head. The experiments proved something the agency never wanted to admit. Our limits exist for a reason. They're not design flaws. They're safety locks. So they shut the doors, sealed the labs, burned the tapes. But you can't destroy an idea that powerful. Once you teach people how to silence their pain, they'll keep trying to silence everything. The labs were gone, the projects buried, the acronyms retired, but the philosophy survived and mutated. Decades later, its language returned, dressed in Instagram filters and motivational quotes. No pain, no gain. Suffer now, shine later. Discipline over everything. The same mindset engineered in CIA black sites was now trending in fitness hashtags. Nobody questioned where it came from. Nobody wanted to, because it worked. Pain still produced results, and results got clicks. The fitness industry loves to talk about mental toughness, but the blueprint wasn't born in a gym. It was written in interrogation rooms. The same techniques once used to strip prisoners of emotion, cold exposure, exhaustion, sensory control, were now sold as biohacks. Ice baths, fasting, silence retreats, dopamine detoxes. People called it self-improvement. The agency would have called it conditioning. Civilians were voluntarily doing what soldiers once needed to be forced into. The difference: no one told them about the side effects. Coaches and influencers repackaged the doctrine in shiny words: grit, mindset, resilience. But behind the glossy branding was the same ancient goal: erase hesitation, override comfort, delete emotion. They told millions of followers to kill weakness, to push past pain, to treat empathy like an enemy of success. And millions listened. Because numbness, when marketed right, looks a lot like strength. Meanwhile, scientists quietly began noticing the fallout. Burnout rates exploded. Anxiety and depersonalization climbed. The hustle generation was experiencing the same psychological fragmentation once seen in military test subjects. Emotional blunting, fatigue masked as focus, depression disguised as discipline. People weren't becoming stronger, they were becoming detached. The ghost of those experiments had found a new home. No agencies, no uniforms, no classified missions, just ordinary people living under extraordinary pressure, convinced that feeling nothing is a superpower. Society had absorbed the experiment and turned it into a lifestyle, and no one realized that the line between performance and self-destruction had vanished. Here's the uncomfortable truth: when you glorify endurance without purpose, you repeat history. You turn the body into a weapon and the mind into its victim. What began as a government attempt to control humans became a cultural addiction to control ourselves. The war never ended. It just changed its marketing. And somewhere out there, in dusty archives stamped declassified, lie the notes that started it all. Notes that warned, decades ago, that erasing pain might also erase the very thing that makes us human. The mind may have been the focus, but the body was the canvas, and it remembered everything. When scientists later reviewed the data from those early programs, they found something extraordinary hiding beneath the trauma. The human body had adapted, not just tolerated, but rewritten its own rules in real time. Under relentless stress, sleep deprivation, and sensory chaos, the body didn't simply collapse. It learned new ways to survive. Heart rates slowed under duress instead of spiking. Adrenal fatigue reversed into stability. Cortisol resistance increased. Oxygen efficiency skyrocketed. It was as if the body had been waiting for the command to evolve, and the torture gave it one. What terrified researchers was how fast it happened. Weeks, not years. Once the mind stopped resisting, the body stopped conserving. It shifted from protection to transformation. Doctors called it adaptive override. The brain, stripped of comfort, began unlocking emergency processes designed for prehistoric survival. Buried systems of energy conservation, pain suppression, even thermoregulation that modern physiology barely understood. Soldiers could lower their core temperature, slow bleeding, and maintain focus at oxygen levels that would knock a civilian unconscious. It wasn't magic. It was biology unleashed. But the cost was steep. For every physical upgrade came a neurological downgrade. The amygdala, the brain's emotional core, shrank in size. Empathy, joy, fear, even love diminished as endurance increased. In chasing invincibility, the human system had sacrificed connection, strength without sensitivity, efficiency without emotion, survival without purpose. Modern science has started catching up, rebranding these same adaptations as flow states, ultra-resilience, and cold tolerance. Researchers at elite athletic institutions study them like holy grails, but few realize their origins trace back to military conditioning programs that walked the edge of human ethics. The physiological effects are real: reduced inflammation, neural rewiring, pain threshold expansion, but the original intent wasn't health, it was control. And yet, the data forces one undeniable conclusion. The human body is far more adaptable than we've been told. Every limitation, pain, fatigue, fear, isn't a wall, it's a safety signal. Ignore it, and the body will keep going, morphing, obeying. For better or worse, it doesn't stop until something breaks. That's the paradox the CIA stumbled into decades ago. By trying to build machines, they accidentally proved how extraordinary humans already were. But the world never got that version of the story. They buried it, because the truth wasn't useful. It didn't serve power. It served awe. For years, they believed control was the final evolution. Total command over fear, over pain, over the self. But they misunderstood what they'd built. The stronger these men became, the further they drifted from what made them human. In erasing emotion, they didn't just kill weakness, they killed meaning. Because strength without purpose is just resistance, and resistance without feeling is emptiness. The agency's psychologists eventually started using a different word for it: separation. They'd created individuals capable of extraordinary performance, but incapable of connection. They could endure anything, but they couldn't live for anything. Missions replaced relationships, goals replaced identity, and silence became the only safe emotion left. When you can't feel fear, you can't feel love either. And that's not evolution. It's exile. This was the paradox of power. The more control you gain, the less of yourself remains to wield it. Those early programs proved that removing emotion doesn't make you invincible. It just makes you hollow enough to keep moving. The body thrives, the mission succeeds, but the man disappears. The ultimate soldier was never broken by the enemy. He was erased by design. Modern culture still chases that illusion. We call it grind, focus, no excuses. We wear exhaustion like a badge and call numbness a virtue. But the truth the CIA uncovered, then buried, is that humanity is the engine of endurance. Pain matters because it teaches us. Fear matters because it sharpens us. Empathy matters because it anchors us to the reason why we fight in the first place. Remove those, and all that's left is output, motion, noise. The irony? Every man who walked out of those black sites alive had to relearn what emotion even was. Some did it through therapy, others through faith, some through total collapse. They all said the same thing. It wasn't the training that broke me. It was trying to feel again afterward. That's the cost of perfection. Once you silence the human inside you, getting him back feels impossible. So maybe the real lesson buried in those experiments isn't how to transcend our limits, but how to respect them. Because the wall between strength and self-destruction isn't built of weakness, it's built of emotion. And crossing it doesn't make you superhuman, it just makes you lost. The CIA wanted to build the unbreakable man. What they created instead was the mirror that showed how fragile we truly are. Because when you strip away the pain, the fear, the hesitation, when you remove every flaw that makes a person feel, you don't end up with strength. You end up with absence. The perfect machine doesn't suffer, but it also doesn't care. It doesn't dream. It doesn't love. And a soldier without those things isn't a weapon. He's a warning. Decades later, the data they buried still whispers the same message. The limits we hate are the same boundaries that keep us sane. Pain is the body's truth. Fear is its compass. Fatigue is its signal that we're still human. We weren't designed to run endlessly, to fight endlessly, to conquer every instinct. We were designed to balance them, to bend without breaking. Every extreme they forced onto the human body proved the same paradox. The deeper you chase control, the less control you actually have. Modern science is finally catching up. Neuroscientists now say emotions aren't interruptions to performance. They are performance. They guide focus, reaction, recovery. The best athletes, soldiers, and leaders aren't the ones who delete feeling. They're the ones who know how to listen to it without being ruled by it. The real evolution of strength isn't about silence. It's about fluency, the ability to understand the language of your own limits. The myth of the unbreakable human was born in a lab, but it's dying in real life. Because we've seen what happens when you live like a machine. You burn, you fade, you forget who you were trying to become. True resilience isn't the absence of weakness. It's the relationship with it. It's the quiet decision to keep moving because you care, not despite it. So here's the final truth, the one they couldn't control, couldn't condition, couldn't erase. Humanity is the superpower, not the body, not the programming, not the pain, the pulse, the fear, the emotion that reminds you you're still here. That's what they tried to delete, and that's what we have to protect. Because the strongest thing a human can do isn't to silence their limits. It's to face them, feel them, and still decide to rise. The CIA learned that lesson too late. We don't have to.